Gregory Levey went to work for the Israelis at the UN. Turns out it's a lot like high school.
And then there's like the little cliques, and you'd see you never see the Americans and the Cubans having lunch. Say if you were seen having lunch with Israel, we were sort of the high school reject. You'd never get like a date for homecoming. People don't make eye contact.
From the studios of Radio Fairfax, just outside of Washington D.C., this is the Mimi Geerges Show. This conversation is from our archives and was taped in June of 2008. Enjoy. Gregory Levey was a 25-year-old Canadian studying law in New York, but then he got bored. So he applied for an internship with the Israeli mission to the United Nations. Instead of a short internship, he was hired as a speechwriter. And things just got more bizarre from there. In fact, after 3 years working for the Israeli government in New York and Jerusalem, he decided that it was no place for a nice Jewish boy. Gregory Levey's memoir is called Shut Up, I'm Talking, and Other Diplomacy Lessons I Learned in the Israeli Government. He joins me in the studio. Greg, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Talk us through the process you went through to apply for a job with the Israeli mission of the UN.
Well, I don't even really understand it myself, but basically I was bored in law school, just incredibly tedious for me, I thought. And I applied for an internship. That is, I just sent in an email and then a fax and then a phone call. They didn't even offer internships openly. Or I just thought, well, maybe they'll hire me to photocopy or make coffee or something like that. A few weeks later, I get this phone call from Israeli security asking me just incredibly intrusive, probing questions and sort of bizarre questions.
Like what?
What side of the street do you live on? Questions about my roommate, questions about where my parents had gone to school. And he actually kept calling back for 2 weeks, almost every day on my cell phone with more and more probing questions, to the point that I thought he was just sort of being nosy. And he refused to tell me why he was doing this. I mean, I assumed it had something to do with the internship, but when I would ask him, is this about the internship? He'd said, well, I was just tasked with investigating you. I can't really say. At the end of that time, I was called into the UN mission at the Israeli consulate in New York, and I walked in, met with the deputy ambassador, and he said, why are you here? I said, why am I here? Well,
Didn't you call me?
Yeah, I mean, I just spent 2 weeks with your security agents. I'm here for the internship. And he said, well, we don't offer internships. So now it was my turn to say, well, then why am I here? This is insane. And he said, well, our deputy speechwriter left. Our head speechwriter's leaving. Maybe you'd like to come on as a full-time speechwriter for the Israeli ambassador to the UN instead of as a part-time intern. And, my head's spinning. I thought I was sort of on candid camera or something, but I said, yeah, well, sure.
Now, did you come from a devout Jewish family?
No, sort of a traditional Jewish family, not in any way religious, but, attended synagogue once a year or something like that.
And at the time, where were you politically on the Arab-Israeli issue?
I just wasn't really a super political person, really, and I don't think I am even now. But from being brought up Jewish, I went to a Jewish sort of, actually a Zionist elementary school. And, it sort of had it embedded in me that to support Israel on every issue without really probing deeper. And I still very much support Israel, but I just, through this experience, realized it's good to look for nuance.
In the book you describe that there's almost a culture of paranoia surrounding the Israeli mission at the UN. Why was everybody so paranoid?
Well, it's by no means just the mission. I mean, it's throughout Israeli government and Israeli society. People are paranoid for good reason. Israeli diplomats have been shot in posts around the world, including like London, and there are constant threats. So they're paranoid for good reason. However, from my point of view, it all seemed a bit bizarre. Just this book is very much about culture clash, and that was one of the examples where I would not think about things properly in a sort of security way, because I wasn't brought up like that, but suddenly I was thrown into this environment where people had guns and people were just paranoid about the mail and who was walking by the building or a million other things.
The book we're discussing is called Shut Up, I'm Talking. It's Gregory Levey's memoir about his time working with the Israeli government. He's a regular contributor to Salon.com and currently teaches at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. You're listening to the Mimi Geerges Show. We're on the web at mgshow.org. You can email your thoughts about the program to me at feedback@mgshow.org. You say that the UN is a lot like high school. How so?
Yeah, that was one of the things that struck me most in working at the UN. I would, I'd go into this and expect adults and sort of a mature way of interacting, which maybe I was wrong to expect. But the UN is very much like high school. There's the cafeteria, which is really, I don't even think the food was as good as my high school's cafeteria. And then there's like the little cliques, and you'd see you never see the Americans and the Cubans having lunch, say. And one of the jokes I make in the book is that if you were seen having lunch with Israel, we were sort of the high school reject. You'd never get like a date for homecoming. People don't make eye contact. There's a clubs fair, which I couldn't believe, where UN diplomats go like canoeing together and stuff like that. So yeah, really like a high school like environment.
There was at one point that the representative of Iran wouldn't sit next to you, and I guess it's alphabetical. So
Right.
Israel at that time was right after that, or right before that was Iran.
Right. Normally you have Ireland and Italy. So Ireland's your buffer because over to your left is Iraq and Iran. So they're sort of your buddies. But on this one particular day, Ireland was like leading the meeting. It was part of the committee. So it was slated that Iran would sit next to me. And actually, this was my first time representing Israel alone at a meeting. I mean, even though I was a speechwriter, they started heaping all kinds of extra responsibilities on me. That's just how Israeli government seems to work. And so it was my first time at a meeting, sit down, and I thought, oh my God, Iran is supposed to sit right next to me. This is going to be awkward. And
Again, like high school, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly like high school. And they didn't sit next to me. So, I mean, that's even beyond high school. It's like elementary school that you refuse to sit next to someone you don't like. And so they broke UN protocol and sat elsewhere. So I went back to the Israelis and I told them what had happened. And of course, they're more used to this sort of high school like immaturity or elementary school. And they said, oh, no, they have no problem sitting next to Israel. The Iranians just don't want to sit next to you.
Now, as a speechwriter for the Israelis, you spent time rebutting claims made by other member countries. At one point, I believe it was the Syrians that said that the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories was causing teen acne and increasing sibling rivalry. I mean, is this really goes on?
Yeah, the UN is just full of weird, first of all, weird discussions which don't really make the press for good reason. I mean, this is bizarre. And a lot of times it's on very small, trivial topics. Israel becomes the butt of a lot of it becomes the object of a lot of attacks on almost any topic that the enemies of Israel bring in, somehow politicize debates, which are on other issues. And, there's many reasons to be critical of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land and other Israeli actions. I certainly have problems with some of the stuff the Israeli government does. But it was bizarre to me that there'd be these accusations like, the occupation is causing sibling rivalry. And I was told, and acne. And I was told, can you rebut that claim that the occupation is causing acne?
So how do you do that?
That's what I said, what? I don't know. You can't rebut something so ridiculous. I think it's ridiculous. I can't think how the occupation is causing acne.
Greg, the Israeli foreign minister had come to the UN to give a speech. You were asked to help write that speech. Tell us about when you met him.
Right. So it was a big honor for me. I mean, like I said, the responsibilities kept being heaped on me to the point where I was helping to write the foreign minister of Israel's speech. I mean, he had his own people in charge, but I was a part of the team, which was, I thought, really great. And we worked hard on this speech. It was for the General Assembly, for the opening. There were going to be all kinds of big shots in the audience, kings and prime ministers and presidents. And the night before the speech, I went for a final rehearsal of the speech, and I went into his hotel suites in New York. And it was me and some very, very high-level people in the Israeli government, and I was just honored to be invited. And I walked into the room. I was actually the first one in the room. And they say, Gregory Levey, meet the foreign minister of the state of Israel. And I put out my hand to shake it. I mean, like a suit. I'm so honored. And there he is. And I thought, oh, my God, he's in his underwear. And he is. He was just in sort of boxer shorts and like an undershirt. And he didn't think that was weird at all. And neither did anyone else when they came in. They were all in suits. It just, I couldn't believe it. But, to me, it's sort of it's telling about the casual nature, impromptu nature of the Israeli government. In a way, it's charming. It's just very informal, but to me, very foreign.
Which you wouldn't expect, to be honest.
No.
I mean, some people feel like Israel's this big puppet master kind of moving everything in the Middle East and everything goes back to Israel. And you think that, there are some real masterminds behind this operation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you can look at it one or two ways. You have sort of anti-Semitic, really, conspiracy theorists. It's almost like the Protocols of the Elders of Zion saying that Israel's behind everything and pushing U.S. policy and so on. And then you have the other side, which just sort of instinctively takes the Israeli position and thinks that you have sort of wise council of, elders, I guess, guiding the policy. And, I mean, there's something there. It's not just totally random, but in the end, it's just very human. And you just have humans like anywhere else in a very tricky situation. And that's really one of the main things I learned. And this guy is sitting there in his underwear, the chief diplomat of Israel at an important meeting. Well, that sort of humanized everything.
The book we're discussing is called Shut Up, I'm Talking. I love that title, by the way. It's subtitled, And Other Diplomacy Lessons I Learned in the Israeli Government. My guest is Gregory Levey. He's a regular contributor to Salon.com. He's also written for The New Republic, The New York Post, The Globe and Mail, and other publications. And currently he's teaching at Ryerson University in Toronto. You're listening to The Mimi Geerges Show. We're on the web at mgshow.org. And if you're on Facebook, please do give us a like. It's facebook.com/MimiG Show. Greg, at one point you even voted on Israel's behalf at the General Assembly. How did that come about?
Yeah, this was almost a disaster, and this was things really going awry. So I was increasingly sent to cover meetings for Israel, not just meant taking notes on what might be of interest to Israel. Even at that was weird at the beginning. I'm like, well, how do I know what's of interest? But, I kind of got the hang of that. And about 6 months after I got there, I arrive in the General Assembly, where I'm sent to take notes on what is going on. But I get into the room, and there's something different in the air. There's just a lot more commotion, a lot more whispering. People were discussing things, and there's more senior level people from all the other delegations and way more people. So people brought their aides and advisors, and it's just me. And I don't know what's going on. So I sit down, and Italy, like I said, you have Ireland and Italy, your two buddies. Italy leans into me, and he says, the vote is going to happen today after all. And I just sort of nod, oh, great. But in my head, I'm thinking, oh, my God, what vote? I didn't know anything about a vote. No one told me. I don't know what we're voting about. So I'm urgently calling Israel on my cell phone, and that is my superiors in the Israeli mission. And I couldn't reach them. Just horrible phone reception at the UN, and we kept getting cut off. And eventually I got through. I said, there's going to be a vote. They said, a vote? What vote? And I said, well, maybe you could tell me. And they said, well, we'll get back to you. And we got cut off again. Couldn't reach them. Timer is counting down. They're about to vote. Everyone's sitting down. I don't know what to do. So I look across. I'm considering running away, which is like one of the things I often consider during this experience. But I see across the room my only hope. I see the United States delegation, and I think, okay, well, this is all I got. I mean, Israel and the U.S. usually vote together. So I figure, well, just sort of cut out the middleman and ask the U.S. what I should do. So I walk across the room to a super senior guy at the State Department. You could tell he had a whole bunch of aides with him, and there were two of them standing right next to him. And I said, hi, I'm representing Israel. And that look on his face said, first of all, you don't seem Israeli. And second, what are you, 15?
You do have a boyish look to you, though, Greg.
Thank you. And and then it was 5 years ago or so. So I looked even younger. And I said, yeah. Anyway, I don't really know how we're going to vote. And he says, you don't know? And I said, not as such. And he sort of leans. I say to him, well, maybe you could tell me how you guys are going to vote. And we kind of lean in. It's like a football huddle or something. And me and his two aides. And he says, we're voting against it. And I said, oh. And he said, just between you and me. I said, okay, against it. I don't know what it is we're voting against, but at least I have something here to work with now. They're voting against it. So I thought, okay, I guess Israel probably would vote against it too. Whatever it is, I walk back across the hall to my seat. I call the Israelis, still can't get a proper answer. Bad cell phone reception. They call the vote, sort of hold my breath. There's 3 buttons in front of me, red, green, and yellow. And I think, okay, red it is. And I press the button. And the tally comes up, 92 in favor of the resolution, several dozen abstentions, and 2 against. And I remember thinking at the time, it's not really, and it too said Israel and the United States, but I remember thinking, because there's a scoreboard at the UN, believe it or not. And I remember thinking, well, it's not really accurate to say it's Israel and the U.S. It's more accurate to say it's the U.S. and Greg. But thankfully, about a minute after, suddenly, of course, I had great cell phone reception. And the Israelis reached me and they urgently said, Greg, we need you to vote against the resolution. I thought, okay, great, no problem.
Boy, that was close, Greg.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, how did you end up working for the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Ariel Sharon?
Yeah, things just went from crazy to crazier during this experience about a year and a half in. So by that point, I'd been writing speeches for a while, and I was sort of getting confident with it, even though at the beginning of this experience, I'd never written a speech. But I was about to graduate law school, and I thought, well, it's time to move on. It's been a great job, which I originally envisioned as an internship. But just then, the Prime Minister comes, and they asked me to help craft a speech for him. And it was a really important speech. It was about pushing his disengagement from Gaza, which was just a few months away. And
this was a speech he was giving in the United States?
In the United States to American Jews, but really like the audience was more American politicians and policymakers and think tanks, that kind of thing, to try to push the idea of the disengagement from Gaza as reasonable policy. And so it was an important speech. And they asked me to help do it. And I wrote a first draft, and in the end, I mean, most of what he said I wrote, which was mind-blowing. And I didn't meet him or anything at that point, but I sat at the back of the room and just watched the Prime Minister of Israel, Ariel Sharon. I hate him or love him. He's a historic figure. I thought that was a great way to end off this experience. I thought, well, perfect, now I can leave. And it's been a nice chapter in my life. But a week later, I get a call from the Prime Minister's office. I'm literally cleaning out my desk at the time. Like, my desk drawers are open. They say to me, well, the Prime Minister really liked your speech. His advisors liked your speech. And we'd like you to move to Israel to be his English language speechwriter. The only catch, you have to move now.
Now meaning what?
Within a few weeks. And I had to give them the answer within a few days. I mean, against my better judgment, I agreed.
Moved.
I did, yeah. I landed on the day that they disengaged from Gaza. So things were just progressing along this increasingly crazy route for me.
And was working in the Prime Minister's office any less haphazard than it had been at the UN?
I would say more. It's a much more intense place. The UN, at least, you're dealing with things from a distance, from a remove. The Prime Minister's office, things are just happening around you, and the speed of things is just mind-blowing. The other thing was whereas at the UN, I'd been, not a big player, but a player in a small pond. Like in the Prime Minister's office, I was suddenly a real small fish in a huge pond, and I was just sort of thrown in there into the flow of craziness around me. And I was a very minor role there because he doesn't do all that many English speeches, so it was just this guy, and things were more haphazard, really.
Greg, is it true that you inserted Seinfeld references into Sharon's speeches?
I am not proud of this, but yes, it is true.
What was it, like no soup for you or something like
that?
Yeah,
well, we've been joking, like, would it have been easy to get the soup Nazi concept in there? I don't think that would have been so easy. But there were he never actually gave a speech with my words in it, and I kept trying to get them through, but he did eventually okay one of them. So we went all the way to the Prime Minister through like the legal department and the foreign policy advisors, because it has to go through a lot of levels from the time the original speechwriter does it. And he signed off on it. He said, I will be doing it. And that one actually had at least one reference to Seinfeld in it. Unfortunately, the speech itself was never delivered, but I was very delighted.
What was it? What's the reference?
So there were two. The one I definitely got into that speech was from the Festivus episode, where they say they say the feats of strength, which is one of the rituals of Festivus. George Costanza's parents do. Well, I took the feats of strength. I thought, well, Ariel Sharon, he's a strong man. I can work that in here. So I used, there's a time for feats of strength and a time for feats of reconciliation, which I thought sounded very prime ministerial. And he signed off on that. Unfortunately, the speech never actually played.
You started to get very frustrated, though, living in Israel. Why is that?
Yeah, this book has basically increasing levels of frustration as it goes along, which was how I felt. It's culture shock, it's culture clash. Then that sort of informality, when I saw the foreign minister in his underwear, it was charming at that point, that sort of level of informality and doing things at the last minute and just being disorganized. It was humanizing. But when you're thrust into it and living it 24 hours a day and working with that and trying to do a pretty serious job in those conditions, it was just increasingly frustrating. So, it became pretty clear for me this was not something I would be doing in the long term.
You're listening to The Mimi Geerges Show. You can find us on the web at mgshow.org. You can also follow me on Twitter. I'm at Mimi Geerges, Mimigeerges. Greg, at one point you took a interesting car ride with one of the people from the Prime Minister's office. His name was Renan.
Yeah, well, he was the chief English language spokesperson for Prime Minister Sharon, and he just lived media and government and politics. I mean, I've never seen someone with so much energy, and he seemed to have like 4 cell phones going at all times, and he'd been doing this for a long time. And I took many interesting car rides with him, but one in particular, which I wrote about in the book, we were driving along to the studios in Jerusalem where he was going to do TV, I think for Fox or CNN or I don't know, one of these big network type things. And we're driving along, and he another interesting thing about him was that he seemed to have an obsession with the ABBA song "Dancing Queen." I would hear it coming out from his office door. I'd hear it in the car. I don't know. He loved Dancing Queen. And we're driving along, and he'd playing it on repeat. So each time we would end, he'd press repeat. And we're driving along through Jerusalem's crazy traffic. We're like on the sidewalk, because Jerusalem traffic is just insane.
He actually drove on the sidewalk?
Oh, everyone's on the sidewalk. Israel traffic rules are, they're a guideline. But anyway, we get a call. He gets a call on his cell phone from CNN radio in Atlanta. I think it was in Atlanta. And so I figured, okay, he'll either pull over or he'll say, like, we'll call you in 10 minutes when we get to the studios. But no, or at very least turn off the music, Dancing Queen. But to my amazement, he turned down the music, but he actually did the interview as we drove along, swerving through the streets with Dancing Queen playing in the background with this big American, I think it was CNN radio, I'm almost positive. And he did it. He answered all their questions on gave the government's line. I imagine somewhere out there they have a tape where in the background you can hear Dancing Queen, and he's talking about super serious issues. I mean, things just move at that speed in Israel, I guess, that you have to be used to that way of doing things.
But I was really surprised to read that there have been more Israelis that have been killed in traffic accidents than in all the wars and terrorist attacks combined.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that comes out on after the weekend each week in Israel is a report. I mean, I get all these reports in the government, and one of them is the number of traffic accidents and deaths over the weekend, and it's just staggering. People just drive like there's no tomorrow, because in Israel, it could always be that there is no tomorrow, and that's sort of the way they live their lives.
But you also said that you had felt a constant sense of coiled tension and hostility.
Definitely. And so you feel that in the driving. Road rage here is nothing on road rage there, although thankfully people aren't really armed there. But the way they treat each other on the roads and the amount of accidents and the aggression. I was in a fairly big car accident there. It's staggering. And yeah, you feel that hostility all the time. And I feel bad for them for having developed it. But they've sort of had to. But it's not a very healthy way to be, unfortunately. And they know that.
Why did you eventually decide to leave and return to the U.S.?
A mixture of personal and sort of political issues. I mean, my fiance at the time, now wife, had to go back to school back in the U.S. I'd sort of dragged her along with me. But even that decision was made a bit easier. We maybe would have stayed if there was still some sort of level of optimism for in our minds. That decision was made easier because this sort of window of opportunity had closed, it seemed to me. When I started working with the Israeli government, it was a real optimistic time. I mean, disengagement was coming from Gaza, and I really thought that might help the situation. I really supported that, as did a lot of other people. And also, after Yasser Arafat passed away, it seemed like there might be a new Palestinian leadership, and Ariel Sharon somehow had turned around and seemed amenable to making sort of concessions and talk. And it seemed like with the disengagement, there would be really some light on the horizon. But then, after Prime Minister and the new party he formed, the Kadima Party, all these things seemed really positive. But then after his stroke and the rise of Hamas in Gaza, things just seemed to be going real downhill, and it seemed to me like that window of opportunity had closed. So that made the decision to leave for personal reasons a lot easier, because I didn't really see too much hope. And actually, it was just a few weeks after we left that the war with Lebanon started. So that sort of confirmed for me that, well, I was trying to help things in my own little tiny way, and it seems like there's not a lot to help.
I know you're not a policy person, Greg, but what do you see as the solution to this conflict?
Yeah, I'm certainly not a policy person. My book's sort of a description of my experience, not a prescription for anything. So I don't know. I mean, it's just so frustrating. I just came away very pessimistic in the end about any chances, unfortunately. I wish I could say, here's what we need to do. What I can say is this. This used to be a totally political conflict, well before my time, but it has become a religious one, or it's becoming a religious one. I mean, political conflicts, in theory, can be solved. This one's very tricky, but in theory, any political conflict can be solved. Religious conflicts can't. The more it becomes a religious conflict, the more people are saying, oh, my holy book says this, and your holy book says that, or this site's holy to us, not to you. And the more, it's never going to get anywhere. You can't argue with it. And Palestinian society has become very religion-focused in a way it didn't used to be. It used to be one of the more secular Arab societies. Now, with the rise of Hamas and all kinds of extremism. And on the Israeli side, you have an increasing level of power to Israeli settlers and other sort of right-wing religious types. And there's just you can't compromise on religious stuff. So the longer it goes on, the more religious focused it becomes, and the less chances I see for peace.
Gregory Levey, he's the author of the memoir called Shut Up, I'm Talking, and Other Diplomacy Lessons I Learned in the Israeli Government. It's published by the Free Press. Greg, thanks so much for being on the program.
Thank you very much.
If you missed any part of that interview, you can find it in its entirety online on our website. We archive everything there. It's mgshow.org. You can also like us on Facebook. We're at facebook.com/Mimi G Show. I'm on Twitter, so feel free to follow me. I'm at Mimi Geerges. It's MIMIGEERGES. I also have a YouTube page. That's The Mimi G Show, and you can subscribe there. We are looking for sponsors, so if you have a nonpartisan message that you'd like to get out to our very intelligent audience, please do get in touch with me. My email address is mimi@mgshow.org, and we will thank you profusely on the air for your support, so please do get in touch. Thanks for listening.